Beginning in the 1950s, steam locomotives began to vanish in America. As steam was declining, there were those who could just not bear for these interesting machines to become silent forever. These people took up the task of saving steam locomotives and finding places for them to run. Today, there are numerous places in the United States where one can go to relive the bygone days of steam. In this program, we'll visit two of them, one in the east, the other in the mountain west. The Pennsylvania Dutch country near Lancaster is known around the world for its Amish residents with their buggies and beautiful farms. It is here that visitors can find a steam railroad that fits perfectly in this setting, the Strasburg Railroad. The first thing that arriving passengers notice, of course, are the immaculate trains at the East Strasburg Depot. Also located here are a variety of shops and eateries. In addition to the full-size trains, there's also a scale railroad that's popular with the kids, pulled, of course, by a real scale steam locomotive. Founded in 1832, the Strasburg Railroad is the oldest line in the United States, still running under its original charter. It started by carrying passengers and freight. The passenger service ended about 1919, and in 1957 its owners had given up on the freight business as well and applied to abandon the railroad. A group of investors stepped in, bought the line, and transformed it into what it is today, one of the premier places to experience railroading of the early 20th century. Although the Strasburg Railroad is only 4.5 miles long, don't be misled. It carries several 100,000 passengers a year and is one of the busiest tourist railroads in North America. Let's take a look at the route. Strasburg is located in eastern Pennsylvania, not far from Lancaster and Philadelphia. Just east of town is the twin complex of the Strasburg Railroad on the left and the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania on the right. The Strasburg Railroad depot area is the focal point of the line, with a small yard, water tank, depot, and more. Just east of the depot area are the locomotive shops. Both extensive restoration and daily servicing are done at this complex. Traveling east, the railroad passes through rich farmland, traveling alongside several Amish farms along the way. At the midpoint of the line is the passing siding at Groff's Grove. Trains meet here, and passengers can enjoy a line-side picnic area. Continuing east, trains pass the station at Carpenter's before curving into Lemon Place, where the Strasburg Railroad interchanges with Amtrak's Harrisburg line. Although our focus will be on the Strasburg's passenger trains, the railroad is still in the freight business too. The line aggressively markets freight, and there are several shippers who use the services of the Strasburg Railroad. The steam locomotives we'll see have interesting histories. Number 90 is a 210O built in 1924 by Philadelphia's Baldwin Locomotive Works and spent her early career carrying sugar beets for the Great Western Railway in Colorado. 280 number 475 was built by Baldwin in 1906 and carried freight on the mighty Norfolk and Western in the southeast United States. 260 number 89 hails from Canada, where it was built by the Canadian Locomotive Company in 1910 and worked for the Canadian National Railway. Mornings in East Strasburg find the locomotives simmering away in the engine house. The day begins with the steam locomotives being greased and oiled. Once steam is up, the locomotives are backed out and preparations continue outdoors. The steamers have had their fires banked overnight, so every morning, hostlers have to get the fires going once again. After that is load up the tender with coal. Then the locomotive is backed over the ash pit. The ash pan is washed, then the clinkers are dumped out. After that, the boiler is blown down and the locomotive is ready to go. The engine is then backed out of the shop area onto the main line, then proceeds toward the depot. Here, just like any other train station, the passengers buy their tickets and then board the train. We'll follow a round trip on the Strasburg Railroad. Like many short lines once did, the locomotives run tender first in one direction, then chimney first in the other. The moment the trains leave the maintenance area, they're in Amish farm country and really do resemble trains of a long time ago. Groff's Grove is midway along the line, and this is where opposing trains meet. Here we find a westbound with number 90 on the point stopping to wait for eastbound number 475 to go by. Lemon Place is the end of the line for the Strasburg. It's here the railroad interchanges with Amtrak's former Pennsylvania Railroad Harrisburg line.
Clean out that boiler for a little bit, and they're going to hook it up. We'll do a brake test, and we'll be back. We do have a train photographer. She's on through.
Located here at Lemon Place is a runaround track where the locomotive reverses direction and heads to the other end of the train. The runaround is complete. Now it's back to Strasburg. We've arrived back at East Strasburg. Here the locomotive once again runs around to the other end of the train. It's the end of the day. The last train has been run. Number 90 is being put to bed, but will be back in action tomorrow, once again carrying thousands of passengers on a trip back in time. Traveling west, we're in Chama, New Mexico, where we'll visit the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad. Like the Strasburg, this line was saved by people who could just not bear to see it go. In this case, a group of people convinced the states of Colorado and New Mexico to buy the line in 1970 after the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad abandoned it. This line was built narrow gauge with 3 feet between the rails, part of a once vast system of such lines the Rio Grande ran. Located in Chama are a variety of structures that have been here for decades, some as early as the 1880s. The railroad also has an extensive collection of wooden freight cars, a few of which we'll see on special photo trains. The steam locomotives, numbers 484, 487, 488, and 489, were built in 1925 by Baldwin for the Rio Grande and have worked this line for decades, as well as other Rio Grande narrow gauge routes. We'll also see a few scenes with Rio Grande 280, number 315, built in 1895. 315, while not part of the collection here, visits the railroad from time to time and pulls photo freights using vintage rolling stock. Mainly, though, the CNTS makes its living carrying tourists on this scenic mountain line that runs for 64 miles between Chama and Antonito, Colorado, crossing 10,015-foot Cumbres Pass in the process. Since the high point of the line is at Cumbres, we'll follow trains uphill to the summit from both directions, starting with the Chama side first. Chama, elevation 7,863 feet, is located in northern New Mexico, near the border with Colorado. Located here is a large yard and locomotive terminal as well as the depot. Leaving Chama, the railroad travels northeast through the Chama River Valley, eventually entering an area called the Narrows, where the railroad, river, and Highway 17 are all jammed inside a narrow canyon. Past the Narrows, the line enters an area known as Lobato, where there's a passing siding and a large bridge that crosses Wolf Creek. The Cumbres and Toltec is climbing a 4% grade here, passing through pasture lands as it climbs. Shortly after crossing Highway 17, we move into Colorado near the Cresco Water Station. Uphill from Cresco, the line passes through a narrow canyon near Hamilton's Point as it approaches Coxo. At Coxo, we cross the highway again, then, still climbing, loop around and ascend Windy Point, high above the highway and valley below. Shortly after Windy Point, we attain the summit at Cumbres. Departing Chama, trains pass through the historic yard, by the old coaling tower and double-spouted water tank. In the Narrows, the train hits the 4% grade, which will exist most of the way to Cumbres. At Cresco, the railroad crosses into Colorado. Cumbres, at 10,015 feet, is the highest point on the railroad. As our train continues on to Osier, we'll go to the other end of the line at Antonito and work our way back. Antonito, Colorado is located at an elevation of 7,888 feet and is the eastern terminal for the Cumbres and Toltec. Let's take a look at our route west. Antonito is located in southern Colorado, about 10 miles north of the New Mexico border, which is about how far Chama is to the south of it. Just south of town is the Cumbres and Toltec. There's a depot, car shops, water tank, and turning loop here. Starting west, the railroad passes through an arid, desert-like setting. The line is steadily climbing and will eventually cross 5 climate zones between here and Cumbres. The big loop of track at Lava is in New Mexico. The Cumbres and Toltec crosses the state line 11 times between Antonito and Chama. At Whiplash Curve, the railroad gains elevation by winding back and forth on 3 levels. One hallmark of this line is that it seemingly winds around every hill and mountain so as to keep the grade as gentle as possible. Sublet, New Mexico is an old maintenance camp, and we'll see a train arrive here. Past Sublet, the railroad is high above the Los Pinos River Valley and soon passes the siding at Toltec. This area is very popular with the railroad's passengers. Soon, the Cumbres and Toltec tunnels through the mountains that cling to the side of the hill, with Toltec Gorge far below. At Osier, the trains from Chama and Antonito meet and stop for lunch. Continuing west, the line continues to cling to the side of the mountains, crossing Cascade Trestle in the process. Beyond Cascade Trestle, the valley begins to open up as the railroad nears Los Pinos. At Los Pinos, the railroad makes a big horseshoe and resumes its climb toward Cumbres. Just before the summit is the Cumbres Loop, also called Tanglefoot Curve, another place where trains gain elevation by winding around. Just beyond the loop is the station at Cumbres. We're just west of Antonito, where trains clip along at a brisk pace. Several westerns have been filmed in this area, including Indiana Jones, Bite the Bullet, and The Good Guys and the Bad Guys. At Lava, the trains curve around a big loop. Surveyors use several loops to help gain elevation. At Sublet, trains stopped for water in both directions, making the ghost town busy for a few minutes. Just past Rock Tunnel is the Garfield Monument. A memorial service was held here when President Garfield was assassinated in Washington, D.C. in 1881. We're at Osier, where we see the train from Chama and Cumbres arriving. Osier was once a section camp, just like Sublet and Cumbres, where workers once lived taking care of their section of track. Located next to the historical Osier is the dining hall, built in 1989, the lunch stop for both trains. The Cumbres and Toltec offers various travel options. Some passengers go to Osier and then return to their originating station, while others will change trains and see the entire line. At Cascade Trestle, the line is 137 feet above Cascade Creek. At Los Pinos, the Cumbres and Toltec uses a horseshoe curve to gain elevation. This was once a lonely section camp, but today Los Pinos has an ever-increasing number of summer cabins. Just below Cumbres is the Cumbres Loop, which is often called Tanglefoot Curve by rail fans. Here the railroad makes almost a complete circle as it gains elevation. We've once again arrived at Cumbres. Our train will stop here for water and a brake test, and then we'll head down the mountain to Chama. In the last hour, we've looked at two railroads that should both be long gone were it not for determined people with vision who saved each one for future generations to enjoy.